Okay, this is a video of how to change the fuel pump and also for engine or Evap code 442 or 456. Um, Unfortunately, I had a mouse that chewed a hole through my fuel pump, but it took a lot of money and a lot of effort to figure that out. Now, initially I brought it to the dealership and because I figured they could figure it out pretty easily. And they did a typical diagnostic and said it was the Evap purge solenoid, which is this thing. You can watch some other videos how to put this in. They replaced it. I had asked for the part back just because in case maybe later I needed to hobble it back together or something. And lo and behold, like a week later, the code came back on, and it wasn't this. I ended up testing it, and everything seemed to work fine. But back to what the real issue was. A mouse had gotten in underneath my car and had chewed a little hole right into the gas tank here, which is pretty much impossible to see because the top of the car, the underside of the car is like right here. So if you need to go and replace your gas tank, you are going to have to pull out the entire rear subframe. I was hoping that wouldn't be the case, but unfortunately the rear differential and drive shaft is right underneath here, and you just can't quite get the gas tank out. I'm going to give you a couple pointers on how to get this done and show you a couple of connections that can be pretty miserable to get at. So on this side of the fuel pump, if you do need to replace the fuel pump, you really want to buy one of these tools. You can get it off of Amazon for like 27 bucks. But it has these little tangs on the bottom that grab into it. Originally I was going to do it with like a spanner, or sit there and try to drive it with a screwdriver, but it is not gonna happen. So there's a little underneath of there, there's a little green O-ring that's between the fuel pump and it, and then you have this new ring. I bought new ones since I don't want to have to do this again, but when you do, you have to put a lot of torque on this. You have a little 18-inch breaker bar, and it took a pretty, maybe 50 foot-pounds, 60 foot-pounds of torque to get that thing loose. And it's also spring-loaded, so it pops up really quickly when you're doing it. And when you go to put it back on, it's helpful if you heat up that little green O-ring, with a heat gun or something, so it's a little bit pliable. Maybe get it to like 100 degrees or something. And also put a little bit of maybe silicone lubricant, on the ring, so it's going to slide easily underneath of these. Because again, when you are putting that torque on, it snaps into place really quickly. Now, to orient you, so there's the fuel tank. It's in the same position as underneath the car. This is the fuel filler neck, which then connects up. These are the two Evap lines which connect into the canister, like so, underneath. And you can also see the little, this is the, what do you call it? The relief vent for the canister. So gas vapor comes out of here, comes up, goes into the charcoal canister, and then comes out this way and runs through this line right here, and it runs down through this guy and then through a tube underneath the car up into this guy that's underneath the hood. So these are two connections that you have to undo that are on the side of the gas tank, and they're a little bit tricky to get to when you're underneath the car and they got a little bit of gas in it. In order to undo these kind of connections, you have to pull this little tab out. It's got two little nubs here, which it just pops out. Then it has a little quick release button here where you gotta push that button in really, really hard to get it to release. So maybe a pair of pliers sometimes might work, but it takes a lot of effort to get that guy loose. This other green type connector, it has two little nubs right here, which I'll snap this one in. So you just need to push that sideways like that on both of them and then push it out, and it'll come out not too bad. So if you do need to do some evap testing on your car because you have a 442 or 456 code, this is the line that you need to disconnect to do a smoke test. This one is a four-wheel drive car. It's a bit of a pain to get at this, but you can do it. You can also get this loose from underneath the car as well, because I've done both. It's a real pain, but you can do it. So I know to smoke test the gas cap, because the capless gas cap, originally I thought that would be the issue. So I ended up popping this tab out and from underneath the car, then putting a smoke tester into that, like that. Again, make sure you put like a little silicone lubricant or something, like spray electrical lubricant on it, and that will plug it up. And from there, it will test your gas tank, and also your fuel fill neck, and it'll come up. So my issue wasn't there. How I eventually figured out that that this was leaking was that the car was full of gas. I jacked the rear up, and eventually, after about 20 minutes, the fuel filled up into this little cove here and started dripping down. So I was like, okay, must be a fuel leak. So out here, you can see this is the gas pump, or the fuel pump, and you can see where a mouse gnawed a tiny little hole into there. And I guess at that point he decided he would move on. So in order to get to the gas tank, you need to pull the exhaust out and also disconnect the drive shaft, remove the rear subframe, and to do that, the exhaust is welded all into one place. And the Ford specific guidelines of how to remove the exhaust is you got to cut it. So if you take a Sawzall and you cut it, then later on you put one of these couplers back on. Ford sells them, they're like 35 bucks. This one is a Walker one that I order off Rock Auto for like 10, 15 bucks. But you can see it's got little tabs in there, and it's removable later if you need to disconnect the muffler again. When it clamps it, it seals it all up. It's much better than using those U-bolts where it deforms the the exhaust line, where you can never get it apart again. So those just slide over top, put it in halfway, tighten it down, and you could probably get all this out with leaving the exhaust in, but you're gonna have to cut it out in order to get the gas tank down. Okay, so you cut those two pieces, you popped it out. Now the subframe, the instruction manual says to remove the drive shafts, but you don't really need to do that. You can leave them in and pull them out. I've just zip tied them here to the sway bar while I was moving it around. But you have to disconnect the bolts from the drive shaft. I think there's about 6 of them. They're pretty difficult to get loose. What I ended up using are these guys here from Harbor Freight, because these are 1/4-inch impacts, so they're much thinner. It's this, I think it's a T40 or 45. It's much a thinner shank to where it goes in, so it can actually get next to the driveline and get it loose. There's a bunch of other videos of how to get those loose, but that worked well for me. If you ever do need to do a service on this to fill, here's a fill plug here, but I don't think you ever need to get to that. Here's the drain plug to where you could suction it out and fill it back up later. So you're only gonna fill it up to, I think, 5 millimeters below that plug maximum. So really you would never need to pull out the fill plug. You can just pull out the drain plug, suck anything out. It's obviously quite a monster to get to. And this car's only got about 60,000 miles on it, so I'm not gonna service it yet. Maybe at about 100 or so, I'll get in there. So you do need to remove the springs. I've seen some people who've left them in. You might be able to, but it makes it kind of difficult to get to this bolt, which comes up, underneath. You can run a extension up through here and get to it, but reinstalling it could be a real pain. It's really much easier just to pull the spring out. Now, when you go to pull it out of there, you do need to remove the wheel, the bearing. And when you take that bearing out, there's a splash shield that is on here. And let's see which way is it oriented. I think something like that. And when it's on there, the only way to separate it from the housing is either with a sledgehammer right here. You could use a wheel bearing puller, slide hammer to get it out. Or what I did is I just took a air chisel and, put it on both sides, and it worked its way out. Now when you separate those, it does mess them up. And you can see here, you either need to grind them flat or pound them, or just buy another pair. I think they're about $6 a piece when you order them. Not a big deal. The other part, if you didn't want to get into messing with the wheel bearing, I think you might be better off just disconnecting this whole knuckle and leaving it attached to the subframe. You can undo the bolt here at the shock, and also up here underneath. It's a little bit tricky to get to that one, but that might be a little bit easier because that bearing really can be pretty tricky to get loose. And underneath of here, you can see that's where the Evap canister is. I just went ahead and bought a new one. The other one was fine, but I figured I don't want to have to get back in there and break that one loose again. And hopefully that will help somebody else. Usually there's plenty of videos on here that somebody's had a problem before me, so I haven't had to make a video. And this one, probably most people haven't had to replace a fuel pump in here yet. So good luck. Take care.